Greetings, time traveler! We're here today to tell you why ancient Egypt is the most interesting and exciting place to go on your time travel adventures. So first we're going to explain a little bit about Egypt's location compared to the rest of the world. It's located in northeastern Africa. Egypt had ties to several profound civilizations, such as the Mesopotamians, Phoenicians, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southwest Asia. While Egypt itself was a pretty nice place to be, it was surrounded by deserts, mountains, and seas. That rough surrounding terrain prevented invaders from entering Egypt for long periods of time throughout its history. The Nile River was very important to Egyptian life. It rose reliably and predictably every year, and it was carefully directed to irrigate crops. Using this method, the Egyptians were able to use sustainable agriculture as opposed to the Mesopotamians, who ended up getting a lot of salt in their soil because of their bad irrigation techniques. The annual flooding of the Nile was an important aspect of their religion, connecting to the notion of eternal life as well as other things. The pharaoh was rumored to be responsible for flooding it annually.
The geography also helped Egypt develop a more positive worldview, as they weren't constantly fearing for their lives. And with the sun being reborn each day, as it were, in the Nile annually, they got this idea that life would prevail over death and even after death. Egyptians believed in an eternal afterlife that could be reached were you capable of making the journey. Now, in the Old Kingdom, it used to be that if you were the pharaoh or a member of his entourage, you were capable of doing so. But as Egyptian culture evolved over thousands of years in the New Kingdom, it started to be that if you could afford these certain artifacts and lived your life a certain way, even you too could go out and achieve eternal life. Another thing with Egyptians' fascination with death was their burial system. Very elaborate, very complex, and very easy to learn about today due to the fact that their mummification process and their building of elaborate tombs and pyramids for their pharaohs means that we can still find and study their bodies. The mummification process basically turned a pharaoh into beef jerky by taking out his internal organs, seasoning him up, salting him, and then drying him out. But these mummies and the tombs they reside in are still being discovered and analyzed today, giving us a window into the past 5,000 years on. With no doubt, their burial practices have proved their significance by standing the test of time.
The Egyptians had a very stable and sustainable economy. Their economy was primarily based on agriculture. Most citizens lived in small farming societies on the banks of the Nile, and there were few concentrated cities due to the high security that was granted to the Egyptians by their surrounding rough terrain. The Egyptians used the natural and predictable flowing of the Nile to help them build a sustainable agriculture. The Egyptians also had a wide network of culture and commerce. The Egyptians traded a lot of culture as well as goods with Mesopotamia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Manoa, in addition to Nubia. Nubia was their most immediate neighbor to the south, and there was a lot of cultural diffusion there. Nubia took a lot of their cultural traditions from their more powerful northern neighbors, such as the pyramids, some gods and goddesses, and even hieroglyphs. Their wide network didn't always do them good, though. The Hyksos, a pastoral group that had horses and chariots, invaded and ruled Egypt from 1650 to 1535 BCE. After this attack, the Egyptians' shattered sense of security stimulated the adoption of several technologies developed in Asia, such as horse-drawn chariots, military equipment, new spinning and weaving methods, and musical instruments.
Egypt was partially unique compared to other first civilizations in the fact that it was a single unified state. Now, the person who managed this unification was the very first pharaoh, Menes. Pharaohs after Menes would follow in his example with claiming divine authority and ancestry directly from the gods. This granted them supremacy and absolute control over the Egyptian rule of law. There were a couple periods in Egyptian history where the Egyptian state and the pharaoh both suffered some severe losses. Among the things the pharaoh lost include sole access to the afterlife, as well as ultimate divine authority as a means of getting out of trouble. Now the pharaoh was held responsible for his actions. By the time the Hyksos were defeated and Egypt reached its golden imperial age, the pharaoh was no longer half the god he once was. Egypt also develops complex social structures with definitive class and gender divisions applying within the state. At the top of the food chain was the pharaoh and his entourage, followed by the politically elite, those who lived in cities, and then at the very bottom were peasants, and then finally slaves. Egypt had also at this time become a patriarchy. However, we are satisfied to say, unlike other patriarchies that developed around the same time, Egypt was better off in the fact that women were legally recognized as equals and could do many of the same things that a man could. One such document that illustrates the social inequality is Be a Scribe, a text written to children in school to encourage them to take up the scribe profession versus the other more difficult, less rewarding, more middle-class professions of the civilization.
The Egyptians made a lot of intellectual and artful developments. One notable development was calendars. Their original calendar was based on the 12-month lunar cycle. Each month had 28 to 29 days, but that created a year that fell 10 to 11 days short of the solar year, so they changed to having 12 months of 30 days each, equaling 360 days. However, even then they weren't accounting for the last 5¼ days of the year, so they added an extra month to hold the extra 5 days. It was considered unlucky to work on those 5 days, so they had festivals instead. Arguably one of the most important developments of Egypt, however, are their hieroglyphs. The characters of hieroglyphs represent only consonants and words. The language began as only pictographs, but soon evolved to represent sounds and ideas. Hieroglyphs were originally used only for economic transactions, but they expanded to encompass religion, stories, math, and other uses. Regular hieroglyphs were typically only used for ceremonial purposes, but speedier versions were eventually created for ease of use, such as the hieratic and demotic versions.
So with its rich history, ideal geography, and fantastic cultural developments, it's no wonder why you and other time travelers would choose to go back to ancient Egypt. We look forward to seeing you there.